What's going on, guys? It's Brandon back here again today for another season video. Today we got the 2008-2009 season, and definitely a strange season. Definitely the strangest season we've covered so far. So in 2005-06 when the lockout ends, scoring goes up. By 2007-08, scoring is starting to come down a bit more as teams are learning the new game. They're finding strategies to counter it. And scoring is going to stay down for the next real 15 years or so. It doesn't really come back up until 2021-22 is when I'd say the first 132 team era starts that scoring really goes back up. We see teams that were contenders in the past fall off. We see teams that were champions not so far away kind of just disappear. We see teams that were mediocre kind of stay mediocre and kind of stay that way for a while. And we see a division kind of finally come out of the darkness. We see a division that's actually really good that hadn't been really good in a while. To start off, that division is the Central Division. Detroit leads the way at 51-21-10 as the defending Stanley Cup champions, 112 points. The Chicago Blackhawks are back in the playoffs at 46-24-5, and I just realized I did not do the dot thing, so Chicago, St. Louis, Columbus, all back in. Nashville is out. I realized I didn't make a line here. That's not hard. I can do that. Dallas falls out. Colorado falls out. Minnesota falls out. Vancouver goes back in. That one's fine. That one's fine. Ottawa actually falls out here. Carolina goes back in. All right. So that's really about it. Not many changes in the playoff race. But Chicago 46-24-12 is 104 points at third in the West. Tays, Kane, Keith, Seabrook, Sharp, Khabibulin, Havlat. It really stinks that Havlat and Khabibulin couldn't stick around because of the salary cap, because if there was no salary cap, they would have also been very important pieces to the Stanley Cup final team in 2010. That's something I'll get into more so tomorrow, and maybe if I ever do like a review of the teams overall. And there's a what-if scenario I'd like to do in the future as well, which we'll cover that. But the Hawks could have been a lot better if some of their guys didn't have horrible timing for free agency. St. Louis, 41-31-10, 92 points. They're back in the playoffs for the first time in a bit. Columbus makes their first ever playoff appearance at 41-31-10, 92 points. Same record as St. Louis, 6th and 7th seeds right there. And they barely get in. It was very close near the end of the season. Nashville just misses the playoffs. This is one of the only seasons they miss in the salary cap era at 40-34-8, 88 points. In the Northwest Division, Vancouver leads the way after coming last in the division last year, 45-27-10, 100 points, which is lower than Chicago, and people forget that. People at the time, I believe, thought Vancouver should have beat Chicago pretty good. Chicago actually had more points than Vancouver during the regular season. Vancouver was a very bruising team. They would never be something I'd consider a contender, at least this team. The early 2000s teams, absolutely. The early 90s teams, absolutely. The current team, I honestly say, is better than the team that they had back then. It was just a very bruising, nasty team that no one liked playing against. So they get 100 points. Calgary 46-30-6, coached by Mike Keenan for the past 2 years now. 98 points. Minnesota falls out at 40-33-9 with 89 points. Edmonton starts to truly embrace the fall off at 38-35-9, 85 points. They're going to bottom out next year. Colorado 32-45-5, 69 points. The bottom out has already begun. San Jose in the Pacific leads the way with the President's Trophy at 53-18-11 for 117 points. Anaheim's the 8th seed, 42-33-6 with 91 points, barely getting in. And remember, they're 2 years removed from a Stanley Cup. Dallas misses the playoffs, and they won't be back for a while at 36-35-11, 83 points. Phoenix 36-39-7, 79 points. LA 34-37-11 with 79 points, as they are getting better. LA's rebuild kind of came along the same time as Chicago's. It took a little longer, but they got better. And for Dallas and Phoenix, those were two teams that were just middling. Phoenix would be good next year, but Dallas was a team that was middling for so long. The comparison to them is the Florida Panthers. The Panthers, when we get to that side, I'll talk about when we see they're just middling. They're not in the playoffs. They're not good enough to be in, but they're right outside, and it's frustrating for them. In the East, New Jersey leads the Atlantic Division at 51-27-4 with 106 points. Pittsburgh 45-28-9 off their finals appearance, 99 points, which is worse than last year actually. Philadelphia 44-27-11 with 99 points, same amount of points as Pittsburgh. The Rangers 43-90-9 with 95 points. The Islanders bottom out at 26-47-9, 61 points. They get the first overall pick, and who's that? John Tavares. In the Northeast Division, Boston 53-19-10. The rebuild is officially done, I think it's fair to say. 116 points, 1 point behind President's Trophy winning San Jose. And if you remember in the last season, Montreal was first in the East and Boston was eighth in the East. This year they switched. Boston is first in the East, Montreal is eighth in the East at 41-30-11, 93 points. They narrowly get in there as well. They're back. 2008 was their 1 year. They're like, you know what, we're going to be good this year. And back to that, it's like, okay, we're barely going to miss or we're barely going to make it. Buffalo 41-32-9, 91 points as they narrowly missed the playoffs again. Ottawa 36-35-11, 83 points, falls out of the playoffs. Toronto 34-35-13, 81 points. A big part of Ottawa that year, it doesn't happen that year, I believe it happens the year after, but Danny Heatley doesn't produce, this is where Danny Heatley fall-off begins. He was fine in 2007-2008 when they made the playoffs that year, got beaten pretty good by Pittsburgh, but Heatley is not performing the way he was 2-3 years ago when he was scoring 50 goals a season. And Ottawa's fall-off definitely goes hand-in-hand with that. Toronto 34-35-13, 81 points. In the Southeast Division, Washington 50-24-8, 108 points. They're going to be a mainstay in the playoffs for a long time. Carolina, this is their last playoff appearance for the next 10 years, so appreciate them while you have them. 45-30-7 with 97 points, as they're only 3 years removed from their Stanley Cup. Florida just misses at 41-30-11, same amount of points as Montreal, same record as Montreal, but Montreal's got the tiebreaker. Atlanta 35-41-6, 76 points. Tampa Bay, after they bottomed out in 2007-2008, where they got Steven Stamkos, they're still bad, 24-40-18 with 66 points. And they had some struggles there where they brought in Barry Melrose to coach, and everything just kind of went wrong, which ended up they brought in Kolzig, I remember. We'll get into some of their signings down here. But they sold everything that had a pulse in Tampa Bay that year. In the playoffs, number 1 seeded San Jose versus number 8 seeded Anaheim. This is the year that San Jose is supposed to win it all. And they lose in the first round in 6 games to the Anaheim Ducks. Definitely one of the upsets of all time. Detroit and Columbus. Detroit beats Columbus in 4. Columbus gets in because Rick Nash and Steve Mason, Calder winner Steve Mason, decided, I think it's Steve Mason, it's not Chris Mason, right? Steve Mason. But they just clawed and dragged to get into the playoffs. They had no business being there. And then Detroit takes them out in 4, which is pretty fitting. Vancouver and St. Louis, number 3 versus number 6. St. Louis, welcome back to the playoffs. You're not going to be back for 3 years as Vancouver takes you out in 4. For Chicago and Calgary, Chicago wins that series in 6. And welcome back to the playoffs, Chicago. You officially end Mike Keenan's NHL coaching career. In the East, number 1 seeded Boston beats number 8 seeded Montreal in 4. Montreal, who's known for beating Boston a lot, Boston just killed them in that series. Number 2, Washington versus number 7 Rangers. The Rangers took a 3-1 series lead against Washington that year, and the narrative was already beginning, okay, Ovi can't get it done in the playoffs. The narrative already starts this year that Ovi can't get it done. And because 2008 is their first year back, fine, whatever. This year, they're supposed to be contenders, and while they do win in 7, because of Sergei Fedorov scoring his last NHL goal as the winner in that series, we'll see what happens in the next round. Number 3 seeded New Jersey loses to number 6 seeded Carolina in 7. What a series for the Hurricanes. They were the luckiest team on planet Earth in that series. They should have lost games, I believe it was 6, or I want to say it was 6 and 7 were very controversial. And they probably both should have gone New Jersey's way. There was definitely a goaltender interference call that was missed in Game 6 that led to Carolina winning in the final seconds. In Game 7, a complete breakdown by the Devils with a minute to go led Carolina to win that game as well. Pittsburgh versus Philadelphia. It's a rematch of the Eastern Conference Final in the previous year. Pittsburgh takes out Philadelphia in 6 in a nasty series because those two teams don't like each other. In the second round, number 2 seeded Detroit is taken to 7 by number 8 seeded Anaheim. And remember, this is where I'm going to bring in, this is the first season I started watching the Hawks with my dad at night on TV in my living room. We were rooting so hard for Anaheim in this series because we thought we could beat Anaheim. Detroit was still the evil monster of the West, and when you're young like that, you take what your dad says and you hate Detroit. You despise Detroit. And when Anaheim couldn't pull off that Game 7, it was upsetting. Vancouver and Chicago. Vancouver takes the series lead early, but it ends up ending with Chicago defeating the Vancouver Canucks in 6 games. And the Hawks are in the back of the conference final. They're going on a little run themselves. And, yeah, I'm sorry, I just had to check my phone real quick. But that 7-5 Game 6 is one of the greatest games I've ever seen in my life. The Game 6 between Chicago and Vancouver in 2009, that's probably in my favorite games I've ever seen. Just watched it live. Kane's hat trick, the back and forthness, it felt like Chicago was going to win the game, but they were up 3-1. They were down 1-0. They were up 3-1. They were down 4-3. Tie the game, down again, tie the game, take the lead. Third period was crazy. In the East, the Cardiac Canes go again, as the narrative that they either go to the third round at least or lose or don't even make the playoffs is even more put on a pedestal now, as Carolina takes out number 1 seed Boston in 7, with Scotty Walker getting the OT winner in Game 7. Carolina, a 6th seed, now in the conference final. Washington and Pittsburgh. And you know what that means. Pittsburgh is a bad matchup for Washington because they can't beat them. And although Washington dominated the early series, as well as Crosby and Ovechkin both brought a performance in Game 2. In Game 2, they both had hat tricks in the same game. Phenomenal. So yeah, those two were at the top of their game at this point, and the Washington was up 2-0. Pittsburgh wins the next 3. Washington wins Game 6 in overtime, and then Pittsburgh destroys Washington in Game 7. In Washington as well. So 7 games, it's a common theme there. In the conference final, number 2 seeded Detroit beats Chicago in 5. The number 4 seeded Chicago in 5. And as a young fan, it hurt, but some things could have gone different ways if some bounces went right, overtime games went right. Hawks could have won that series. Do I think they win the Cup that year? No, but I don't know what if on that. Some bounces could have definitely brought them to the final. In the East, Pittsburgh takes that number 4 seeded Pittsburgh takes out number 6 Carolina in 4. Evgeny Malkin decided to take over the world and dominated that series like no one else ever had. Except Johan Franzen against Colorado in the year before. In the final, we have number 2 seeded Detroit versus number 4 Pittsburgh. The first back-to-back Stanley Cup final, as in both teams were in the final since 1983 and 1984, where the Islanders and Oilers went against each other in back-to-back years. Detroit won in 6 in 2008. Pittsburgh wins the series in 7 in this year. And I'm going to be honest, they shouldn't have. Game 1, Detroit wins 3-1. Game 2, Detroit wins 3-1. Game 3, Pittsburgh wins 4-2. So Detroit goes up 2-0 just like the previous year. They go up 2-1 just like the previous year. The difference here is Game 4. Pittsburgh lost Game 4 in 2008. They win Game 4 in 2009. Series tied 2-2, where Detroit goes home and they win 5-0 against Pittsburgh. I remember watching that game as a kid, and I remember thinking, this series is over. Pittsburgh's done. Game 6, Pittsburgh wins 2-1. Game 7, Pittsburgh wins 2-1. Phenomenal final. And this is going to be the one that got away for Detroit. Detroit dominated a good portion of this final. I really don't think they should have lost. Puck goes the other way sometimes. Crosby gets his first cup. Malkin leads the way in the playoffs with 24 games, 14 goals, 22 assists, 36 points. Crosby was second at 24 games, 15 goals, 16 assists, 31 points. Fleury 16-8 with a .908 save percentage and a 2.61 goals against. Osgood 15-8 with a .926 per save percentage and 2.01 goals against. In 2008, Fleury was the better goaltender of the two, I thought. In 2009, Osgood was 100% the better goaltender, and yet look who wins. The opposite team won each time. Truly bizarre how this season worked. And when we get into the trades and free agency, it's going to get even more bizarre. This was just a bizarre year. Trophy winners. The Art Ross goes to Evgeny Malkin, as this is one of his big years. 35 goals, 78 assists, 113 points. Masterton goes to Steve Sullivan of the Nashville Predators. The Calder goes to Steve Mason of the Columbus Blue Jackets for kicking and screaming his way into the playoffs. Conn Smythe goes to Evgeny Malkin, as mentioned. Selke goes to Pavel Datsyuk, again. Hart goes to Alexander Ovechkin. The Jack Adams goes to Claude Julien of the Boston Bruins. The Norris goes to Zdeno Chara, now of the Boston Bruins. The Clancy goes to Ethan Morrow of the Edmonton Oilers. The Lady Byng goes to Datsyuk, again. The Pearson, or the Ted Lindsay Award, goes to Alex Ovechkin for who the players think is the most valuable player. The Rocket goes to Alexander Ovechkin, who had 56 goals, 9 back from his previous year, and career high of 65. The Vezina goes to Tim Thomas of Boston, wouldn't be the first time. Jennings, Tim Thomas, and Manny Fernandez share that trophy. And, Boston had a very good year. Of course, they'll be very good in years to come. But this was probably their best year, best team overall that they had during this time period. Because they'd had division wins, they'd had playoff appearances, although they won the Cup in 2011. You could argue the 2019 was their best team. If we want to get it... Oh, I forgot to mention. In this season, for some reason, I used Wikipedia for this. They had the Patrick listed, so I'm not sure if they just didn't award the Patrick for several years or that they just forgot it in the other ones and they added it in 2009. But the Patrick is for growing the game in the United States award. Mark Messier, Mike Richter, and a guy named Jim Delavano take that award home. And first team All-Stars, Ovechkin, Malkin, Iginla, Mike Green and Zdeno Chara on the blue line, Tim Thomas in net. Second team All-Star, Zach Parise, who that's where his big year is. Pavel Datsyuk, Marian Hossa. Datsyuk and Hossa were phenomenal together. It's kind of a surprise that Hossa doesn't sign long-term in Detroit because Hossa had a 40-goal season that year. He was phenomenal playing on the wing of Datsyuk. Lidstrom and Dan Boyle, once again, a second-team All-Star. I apologize to Dan Boyle. I was not familiar with your game. And Steve Mason, of course, getting the second-team All-Star as well. I want to mention the All-Rookie team here, because the All-Rookie team was also on this Wikipedia page opposed to other ones. Patrick Berglund, Chris Versteeg, and Bobby Ryan take the forwards. Drew Doughty and Luke Schenn, and then Steve Mason in net. Of all those players, Drew Doughty is really the only one that truly became a superstar in his own right. Bobby Ryan was good for a while. Versteeg was a good middle six, bottom six forward. Patrick Berglund, of course, lost passion for the game. Steve Mason was good for a good few years. And then Luke Schenn was kind of he's still playing, that's something, but there was nothing really special about him, just kind of an average defenseman. It's kind of interesting how Drew Doughty was kind of the big one there. In terms of anything else, one more thing to mention about the season. Hossa was in Pittsburgh. He loses to Detroit in the final in 2008. He goes to Detroit, loses to Pittsburgh in 2009, and then he cashes in with Chicago the next year, which we'll get to. Trades. I didn't put a lot on the board here. There weren't a lot of big trades. There weren't a lot of name-worthy trades. I just put on the trades I found were most important and that were kind of bizarre. June 24th, 2008, Johnny Boychuk is traded to Boston for Matt Hendricks going to Colorado. Look, in future retrospective, Johnny Boychuk is a lot more notable than Matt Hendricks, I'd say. So Boston wins that one going away. June 29, 2008, Jarrett Stoll and Matt Green are traded to LA for Wisnowski going to Edmonton. Jarrett Stoll and Matt Green win some Stanley Cups in LA. Wisnowski goes to Edmonton for their dark age, so enough said there. July 4th, 2008, Dan Boyle and Lukowicz are traded to San Jose for Matt Carl, Wishart, a first and a fourth. Of course, Dan Boyle, that's his first year in San Jose. He looks pretty good. He's a second-team All-Star. I did not realize he was that good in his time. November 24th, 2008, Lee Stepniak is traded to Toronto for Alexander Steen and Cully Kolyakovo. Steen goes on to have a very long career with the St. Louis Blues, winning a Stanley Cup there. Stepniak was a journeyman. He bounced from team to team. Just a weird trade in my eyes right there. Especially when Toronto doesn't really make the playoffs. I don't know. February 26, 2009, this is a big trade. Chris Kunitz and Tangradi are traded to Pittsburgh for Ryan Whitney. Whitney, of course, goes to Anaheim. Kunitz won a Stanley Cup. They were bringing in experience there. And overall, very good move for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Kunitz stays there for until 2017, I think. And then 2018, he ends up in Tampa. 2019, he ends up in Chicago. March 4th, 2009, Bill Guerin is traded to Pittsburgh for a 4th-round pick to the Islanders. Guerin was fantastic. So back to where we were. Bill Guerin obviously had a very good run with the Pittsburgh Penguins. He was there for 2 years. Very crucial piece, brought in some more experience along with Chris Kunitz to get the Penguins to that Stanley Cup. He also had some big goals in that playoff run as well. For a 4th-round pick, that's a steal. March 4th, 2009, Justin Williams goes to LA for Patrick O'Sullivan in a 2nd going to Carolina. Carolina was another strange team in this year. Carolina was trading pieces in and out like it was candy. Like, you'd think it was a school lunch and they were trading to get the best value item, because it was just... I can't explain some of the moves they made. This was one of them I put on the board. Justin Williams goes on to have a fantastic run in LA, and then he goes back to Carolina. And he also took a stop in Washington along the way. March 4th, 2009, Daniel Carcillo was traded to Philadelphia for Scotty Upshaw in a 2nd going to Phoenix. Daniel Carcillo for Scotty Upshaw in a 2nd is one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in my life. And then I just wanted to mention these at the bottom. Chicago trades Rene Bourque and Robert Lang both for 2nd-round picks. I wouldn't have agreed with trading them both, but if you get seconds for them, that's pretty good value for them, I'm going to be honest. Olli Jokinen has moved twice. He goes to Phoenix, and then once Phoenix sucks, he goes to Calgary, in which he loses in the playoffs. UC Jokinen ends up in Carolina as well. Yoni Pikkinen gets traded out for Eric Cole. So Eric Cole's traded to Edmonton for Yoni Pikkinen, or no, I honestly don't remember what he was traded for. But then he goes back to Carolina midway through the year because he does not work in Edmonton apparently at all. I'm telling you, this is bizarre. And then Tampa's just trading everything that moves, and they're not notable moves either. They're just random throw everything out because why not? Big free agency signings. There were a lot of big free agency signings. Verbata goes to the Tampa Bay Lightning. We see how that goes. Curtis Joseph goes back to Toronto. Andrew Brunette goes back to Minnesota. Jose Theodore to Washington. Cristobal Huet to Chicago. Brian Campbell, big extension in Chicago. Not extension, big signing. Wade Redden goes to the Rangers. His career kind of teeters out by this point. Matt Cook goes to Pittsburgh to piss everyone off for an infinity. Todd Bertuzzi goes to Calgary. Brendan Morrison goes to Anaheim. Joel Ward signs in Nashville. Aaron Asham goes to the Flyers. Curtis Glencross to Calgary. Sean Avery goes to Dallas to once again piss everyone off forever. Ron Hainsey goes to Atlanta to continue his never going to the playoffs for his forever streak until he goes to Pittsburgh. Michael Ryder goes to Boston. Marian Hossa signs in Detroit. Doug Waite goes to the Islanders. Marcus Naslund goes to the Rangers, and honestly, I had no idea he played there even. Miroslav Shatan goes to Pittsburgh, got some experience there. Ruslan Fedotenko, another big part of that team. This team had incredible depth by the end of it. Rob Blake signs in San Jose. Owen Nolan goes to Minnesota. Mark Recchi goes to Tampa Bay. I forgot he played there. Pavel Demitra goes to Vancouver. Claude Lemieux, after being retired for many years, signs in San Jose at age 43. Another bizarre move, I can't explain it. Merrick Malik goes to Tampa Bay, and once again, Tampa Bay is a tire fire, so it's amazing that they are the way they are now. Matt Sundin signs in Vancouver. Brendan Shanahan signs in New Jersey. And then the bizarre situation between Jeff Finger and Kurt Sauer. So Toronto is interested in a defenseman, and they end up signing Jeff Finger. Turns out the guy they meant to sign was Kurt Sauer. I'm not really sure how you mistake a player, but that's what happened in this case scenario. Corey Stillman signs in Florida, Darcy Tucker in Colorado, Olaf Kolzig in Tampa Bay. With all these signings, you would think they'd have been at least not that. Brian Rolston signs in New Jersey. Bobby Holik signs in New Jersey because they decide, well, we're going to get the gang back together with Shanahan, Rolston, Holik, and it somehow works for a bit. And then Mark Strait signs with the New York Islanders. That caps off what I might consider one of the most bizarre years I've ever seen in the NHL. The free agency signings are weird. The trades are very weird. The standings are even kind of... The standings are the only consistent thing here. and yet we still end up with the same Stanley Cup final, but a different Stanley Cup champion. Of course, John Tavares goes to the Islanders, as previously mentioned, and then next year's going to be a fun year for me to cover because I'm a Blackhawks fan and we know what happens then. But I want to thank you all so much for watching this video, and I shall see you all in the next one. Leave your thoughts down below on what you remember about this season, of course. I will reply to anything because this is the first year I started watching hockey, and overall, although I didn't know the ins and outs yet, it was a very cool thing to watch. I want to thank you all so much for watching this video once again, and I shall see you all in the next one. Have a good one.